Today on Just Curious, we're talking with Alex Gruebele and Chandler Gonzales, co-founders of Tau9 Labs, a firm that builds custom AI tools for manufacturers when off-the-shelf software falls short. They work at the intersection of the physical and digital, solving problems like sluggish quoting, outdated planning systems, and messy document workflows. We'll dig into how they built a quoting platform in just 4 months, why context matters more than code in industrial AI, and what business leaders should actually be focusing on to get measurable results from AI. Alex and Chandler, welcome to Just Curious.
Thanks for having us, Stu.
Let's start with your backgrounds. You have experience in mechanical engineering and large-scale software. Tell us about how those influenced the creation of Tau9 Labs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I did my mechanical engineering degree at Illinois, and then I did a PhD in hardware and robotics at Stanford, and then built a hardware company and learned about a lot about how things are made along the way. Um, and what I've kind of seen over the past like decade as a mechanical engineer is that these firms that need things on the product design side work with manufacturers to make it a reality in very particular ways that make it pretty complex to build things. And so there's this kind of like big gap in software adoption that we want to resolve. There's like a lot of value to create. And fortunately, I met this rock star AI and software guy here so we can make that a reality.
Yeah. So I'm Chandler. I started my career at Amazon building hyperscale software, but like you mentioned earlier, I've always been super interested at the software at the intersection of the digital and physical world. So after I cut my teeth in Amazon, I joined a logistics tech startup where I learned a ton about logistics. I was the first engineer, grew with that company for a while, and ultimately led the engineering team as director of engineering. And that was around when I met Alex and got excited about the world of manufacturing and getting even closer to the physical world than the world of logistics. So jump ship with him and to build something together.
Yeah, and it's funny the way that we kind of actually arrived at this building software for manufacturers is we actually spent the first like 6 maybe 9 months or so of like working together, kind of like figuring out a product offering around being manufacturers ourselves to kind of like directly give parts to these product design companies and fill the gaps that they have in what they want from manufacturers. And so we almost raised money actually to build like a vertically integrated factory. But what happened was the software that we were building to kind of prove we could do it to investors, advisors, people we're meeting along the way to get advice from was actually getting really strong pull from the people in the manufacturing world. They were like, oh, wait a minute, is this actually working or is this a demo? Like, could you like deploy this for me? And so we actually figured there's a lot more leverage in basically building software for people who already have, hundreds of millions or more of revenue and all these like physical assets and CapEx rather than us trying to like slowly build that up ourselves over, decades or whatever it takes with debt.
Awesome. You spoke to this a bit just now. Manufacturing has lagged behind in software adoption, not surprisingly, maybe. Why is that? And what is finally shifting now?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a lot of like SaaS has kind of like struggled to like stick, if you will, in the manufacturing industry, at least compared to most other verticals. I think the problem is that every manufacturing company is like different. That's because they're manipulating atoms, and it's much more difficult to like change your business workflow to fit software in some small ways, even when you have to actually then kind of like change the way that physical assets are moving around and made, which is like ultimately what's the core of the business. So it's tough to like make the generic kind of like point software like glove fit, if you will. And there's also to add to that a lot of unstructured data from like production, warranty, technicians, maintenance, tribal knowledge, all these kinds of things, which exist in other industries, but I think are especially strong in the manufacturing world. So you see people basically spending like millions to like strip ERP of all of the like features that they like don't need from it because it's built to like kind of like be able to handle any manufacturing company. And instead of kind of like building it up from the ground up to do exactly like what they need. And so it's been very difficult to like either adopt, either expensive or it doesn't do what you need. And around the last like 2 years, 3 years or so, like 2023, the differences that make this not possible is one, you can handle unstructured data without having to hard code a lot of things. And so that's good for like reading the tons of like PDFs and spreadsheets and so forth that you find in the manufacturing world. And then two, coding is now a bit faster than it was before, maybe 3 to 5x faster. And so it's actually profitable for guys like us to actually build custom software for a manufacturing company that creates them way more value by actually fitting to their workflows than generic stuff that just like scales but has like one-time engineering.
And you focus on companies with between 100 million and 5 billion of revenues. What's interesting and unique about serving that tier of industrial firms?
Yeah, I mean, at that range, you kind of like are big enough to have like problems that are complex enough that they require, data and like high value workflows to solve. At the extreme small size, if you think about it, right, like a one-man shop, really a profitability depends on that person's capacity and their craftsmanship, like their ability, right, which is cool. But the further you get away from that, and the more like hundreds or thousands of people you have involved in the problem, the more your growth and profitability depends on kind of like the systems and workflows around the actual like production itself.
Are there particular problems that you see showing up over and over again in the field?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, anywhere there's basically like unstructured data, I would say. I mean, we'll find people who have like decades of like, technician reports and warranty documentation, things like that. And no human before could have ever read that. I mean, maybe somebody was reading it the moment they like received it or whatever, right? But like to kind of like aggregate all that data, nobody can do that, right? But AI can. And so we think that there's tens of millions of like savings essentially hiding in all these categories of like documents that have been around for decades. PDFs from like technicians that are reporting like defects in the field that you could actually like analyze and solve, or hundreds of like reports or whatever from like the past like year for like a particular machine that's breaking. And it's kind of hard for one person to like tell what's going on. But if you like look across the entire factory, you can actually like solve the problem. And so finding these kinds of problems and solving them is like a mixture of, I would say, AI, like in terms of like natural language processing, that kind of thing for the unstructured data, and then data science and expert knowledge in manufacturing in order to actually like figure out the root cause. Tribal knowledge itself is like something like that's going away. I mean, 25% of the workforce, I believe, is over the age of 55 in this market, and so
Well,
a lot of the guys who know how to solve these things are retiring, but all of their like knowledge is actually captured in some ways in all of the kind of like reports and like part orders and so forth that they've done over the decades of their careers. And so, like, how do you get that out of people's heads and like get that into the heads of the newer technicians and so forth and help them, ramp up to that level of performance as quickly? And a lot of companies also have unplanned downtime. I think like 80% or something like that of companies have had unplanned downtime in the past 3 years. So solving that is like a really expensive problem that depends again on like a lot of like data essentially. Like it's very difficult to like pinpoint what happened like yesterday to cause a line to go down. But if you look at trends of the past 5 years of like reports from quality managers and technicians and so forth, you can start to paint a better picture of like how to solve it. And I mean, there's like a huge amount of revenue trapped in like some of these production lines going down for like an hour here and there. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would add the other area where you see a lot of opportunity here is workflow automation for the administrative
mhm.
side. I mean, I think every manufacturing business is also a business that has to interact with their customers and do accounting and all these other sort of back office things. And a really good example here is quoting workflows. You see people repeatedly copy pasting drawings and specifications, spreadsheet outputs, sending emails, waiting for responses from subcontractors. And most quoting processes are fairly formulaic, but they're also very bespoke from business to business. And like quoting tools, manufacturers might be told that you have to quote in a certain way rather than the quoting tools meeting them where they're at. And so with AI, you can automatically extract info from these unstructured, either historical data sources or the sort of like live requests coming in from customers, which are often like ad hoc and unstructured. You can quickly build out custom quoting algorithms that are tailored exactly to what that quoting workflow looks like. And so, whether you're building fully automated quoting workflows or semi-automated quoting workflows with human in the loop, you're saving on labor, but then also offering a much better customer experience that wins you new deals and helps you close revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So that's like, I think, the primo example of like a back office workflow that is very automatable and you can empower it with AI.
Yeah, and we're going to walk through an example, a case study of how you worked with an injection molding customer to build out custom quoting solution. Before that, I'd love to ask you a couple more questions about how you all work. You mentioned that you like to start with a problem. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you work with a new client to identify the problem, reframe the problem, and where you typically go from there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Some customers, they'll just kind of say like, "I want AI" because like it's like the big thing or whatever, and they feel like they'll be left behind without it, which maybe it's true. And so they have an idea of something they want to automate, but like we've often found actually that that's actually not the like best thing to go after. Like in terms of trying to get ROI for their business. I mean, like this world moves fast, and even for guys like us, it's like a lot of effort to keep up with like the latest models and like what the surrounding infrastructure can actually do well. And so we like to like definitely like get in there and kind of like figure out the reason for the, like AI that they want, and like what the tangential business problems are in case there's something better to work on. So I mean, like, 1 month like a workflow automation might be expensive. It might look like it's worth doing, but it's actually not. And 3 months later, it might be the perfect thing to go after. Like a example actually that we saw last week with somebody we were that's probably gonna be a customer was these guys wanted to automate something around engineering drawing analysis, right? That was kind of like his like, I want AI for like drawings, right? And we looked at what he wanted to do, and it turned out that it would be kind of like a deep project, probably doable, but like a little bit shaky, honestly, on like consistency to like read all these drawings for them. So it was like not that high ROI in our opinion to like develop it. But as we kind of like dug into like why they want the drawing analysis, it was to like free up basically the engineers who were reviewing these drawings so they could spend more time doing root cause analysis on their equipment effectiveness, right? And so then we started pulling on that thread, and turned out that was actually a far more valuable problem to them that was solvable in like, I don't know, probably be like a 20% of the time that it would take to do the other thing, right? And so, they wanted AI, they saw cool computer vision stuff, and so they wanted it for like engineering drawings, but turned out that actually AI to analyze their like machine documents and stuff like that was actually a far like lower hanging fruit, essentially, for a higher value problem in their business. And honestly, like in 6 months, like now we know that they also want this stuff for drawings. Like if the computer vision model is better in the next
Yeah.
round or whatever, we'll build that too.
What does that process look like of kind of following the thread and moving from a problem brought to you to perhaps the sort of true problem that can be solved? Is that a multi-week process? Is it are there workshops? What sort of information are you ingesting and kind of working with to ultimately align on where you start and what the solution could look like?
Yeah, I mean, we are big fans of kind of like flying in essentially and like sitting down with the operators, both like the, like execs or managers at the operating company, but also the like frontline workers. And so yeah, I mean, like our process is basically just like asking questions about what the real business goal, kind of like separating it as much as possible from like AI and like software automation, and then just like trying to figure out from then our end, like, okay, these are the specific solutions. And honestly, sometimes it's off the shelf stuff. Like, somebody's already built something, like slot that in, and we'll tell you that. And sometimes it's something fully custom or like a mix in between. And so we kind of like try to like essentially map an outcome, like what the business wants to do, and then work back from that to build the smallest piece of software possible to solve that problem.
Yeah, and I would add that there's this sort of like 5 whys type process where you kind of like you ask a question and someone has an answer for it, but one aspect of why they answered in that way doesn't really fully make sense with something you talked about 20 minutes ago, and you start to pull on that thread. Or maybe it's something you saw as you were doing a factory tour, or you saw from a previous interview, and so you start to pull on that thread, and they're like, oh well, yeah, I guess now that you put it that way, like that isn't as important, or it like doesn't impact my business as much as I thought it did. It just feels very burning because, I've got like a particularly noisy aspect to this problem. Yeah, I mean, I think that it involves basically like just downloading as much context as you can in your brain, and then really, really pulling on the sort of like fundamental 5 whys, like what's going on here, to understand the sort of root of it.
And who typically are you working with within these manufacturing companies? Both, I guess, like what's the persona perhaps that is your kind of primary stakeholder, as well as which business units do you tend to work with?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, sometimes we'll like work with the like founder owner of the business if it's like a still like personally owned company, and it's like small enough, like often like they're the ones who are engaged because they want to like see change in their company, especially for the next generation of owners or whatever. And then other than that, I mean, it's generally like both with the like VP or head of like manufacturer, head of operations, if it's something that's like factory related, or it's kind of like on the like sales side, like if we're building like RFQ tools and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's like some mix of also working with people who are kind of like product owners in the company, like, down to like, quality managers and so forth, who are actually living the problem.
Great. Well, let's talk about quoting. You shared a case study I mentioned earlier with this injection molding customer. Tell me a little bit about the problem they came to you with and where that led you in terms of the engagement.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I mean, in the world of like ordering, parts from a contract manufacturer, you generally have to like email somebody to like get a, like request for quotation or whatever. And this is slow, and people lose a lot of like business, like kind of like because they don't respond fast enough into these. And there's some big companies actually in the space though, like billion-dollar public companies that have built these kind of like slick quoting platforms that will give you instant pricing, show you a 3D model. You can like interact with the manufacturer in there to like talk about what you need. And they've actually like grown a lot because of that. They're winning a lot of the highest margin business too. This kind of like fast response, low volumes. Like I'm developing something and I want like help in my development process. And so, yeah, I mean, the guys that we've been working with, they recognize that essentially for their injection molding contract manufacturing company, and they actually wanted to move a little bit, maybe you call it down market towards the kind of like prototyping stage instead of the higher volume stuff, so they can both capture business earlier to like move them into production, but also because it's like generally higher margin work if you can do it quickly. And so they wanted to like kind of capture this like unique segment that's between the 3D printing world of plastic parts when you're like really doing low volume prototyping and the like mass volume injection molding stuff with a unique offering that their factory is capable of offering in kind of like between on quantities. And so they needed software to like reflect that and do this kind of like instant quoting stuff for their customers.
And what's wrong with white labeled quoting tools? What wasn't working about what they'd tried already?
Yeah, I mean, as we keep seeing with like manufacturing companies as well, which is why we love the industry. Like, every business is like pretty unique in their capabilities and like what their offering is. They have like their own quirks and stuff. And so these guys did actually look at the off the shelf solutions for like instant quoting and like 3D platforms and whatever. And it just wasn't really serving the exact like niche of what they wanted to offer for their customers. Like the constraints from these like white labeled platforms were a little bit too strong for them. They were also a little bit slower because these platforms offered a bunch of other capabilities as well that they didn't need to offer to their customers or didn't want to. And so they preferred something that's going to be like simple, exactly targeted for their customer experience, and as a result, very fast. And so that's what we were able to deliver for them.
Yeah, and he came to us and basically said, like, how can we get the number of clicks absolutely minimized for a
Yeah.
customer to go from like, I have a part file to I am swiping my credit card. And so that's something we worked really closely with him to like literally get it down to 7 clicks between, part file upload to credit card. So yeah.
And what's that process look like of, I guess, designing and then building the solution? Who are you talking to kind of better understand the workflows and needs? Presumably, their needs within the client, but then their needs within the person that they're, working with on the other side. Who are you speaking to, and how does that inform how you build a solution?
Yeah, totally. I mean, as you might expect, our sort of primary stakeholder is the manufacturer, right? Like they do understand their business really well. They understand what they're good at. They often understand what their bottlenecks are. Sometimes you have to go down the 5 whys with them to understand what those bottlenecks in their business are, but they do have a really valuable perspective to add there. But you can also learn a ton by talking directly to the actual user of the product, right? In this case, like we've got both the operators using the product and our customer's customer, the mechanical engineer, the design engineer. And so, when you talk to those guys, like simplicity is everything, speed is everything. And then I kind of referred to this a little bit with the sort of number of clicks, but that pulled us down the thread of like, hey, maybe we need to do even a little bit more custom than we were even planning to do originally so that we could bring the speed really far down. Because, we saw when we were talking to people and sort of putting prototypes in front of them that even the difference between a quote in 10 seconds and 1 minute might be the difference between you clicking off to a different tab and then never converting and then just being like, whatever, I'll just go with that other tool that I have a quote for. And so, in this world of speed where everything matters, like I think our customer understood that, but they didn't understand the sort of extreme amount that actually does have an impact down to the sort of number of seconds level. And that's something we learned by talking to the mechanical engineers and also observing their behavior when they interact with a real prototype or a real, minimum viable product.
Yeah. And tell me how long it took to ultimately build this platform. And I guess in that answer, I'd love to share a little bit more about like your own process of building software and the extent to which AI allows you to move more quickly and build more quickly than perhaps you could have, let's say, 2 years ago. Tell me a little bit about how long it took to build this and why.
Yeah, totally. So start to finish is about 4 months. And even really within that 4 months, I kind of alluded to it in the last topic, but a big chunk of that was building out a sort of custom 3D modeling sort of like engine that can understand a 3D model and do limited sort of manufacturability analysis and inform the or the pricing algorithm as well. And so even if you took that away, like then we're talking like 2 months, right? To build this e-commerce product. And that is like kind of crazy and unheard of 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And when you take a step back and you look at why, it's really because these AI tools, like software engineering, is kind of ground zero for AI enabling knowledge workers to have superpowers. And so every single step of the software development lifecycle process is now got AI tools that help you do it better, help you do it faster, help you catch mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. So we use it at the design phase. Like we used it to quickly prototype and brainstorm ideas about like should the layout look like how do we want to present the information to our user, we want to sort of what kind of branding do we want to use for this slightly different product offering. We used it in the development phase, of course. Like all these classic AI coding tools are getting better and better by the month. I was just telling Alex earlier that like I started using a new tool a couple weeks ago and was adding a feature to this e-commerce product and was able to do it even faster than I was doing it, 4 months ago when we were building this product for them. Testing, bug fixing, all these tools or all these steps in the process, they all are sort of supercharged and are faster. And even in areas where AI can't do things in a sort of end-to-end way, they still help you retrieve information quicker, answer your questions quicker. And so, something that might have been in an area that you weren't as familiar with, or it has more complexity, if you use the tools right, you can even sort of accelerate that part of the process as well and make that more complex thing more manageable in its complexity. So, yeah, all in all, I think it's, embedding itself into every single process of how software engineers work. And I think a lot of people look at that and say, therefore, it's coming for every job. There's a lot of work to get it from the sort of supercharged powers that we have in software engineering into other types of work. But it kind of gives you a glimpse into what that looks like.
And what were the results of building and then launching this new platform? And I'd love to maybe go back to the initial problem. What are the biggest issues with slow quoting, and what then was the customer or client rather able to see when it came to quoting time and conversion, revenue growth, et cetera?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, yeah, being first to like respond to like a quote, I think increases like your chance of getting it by like 2x or something like that. It's like something crazy, and that means responding usually within like a couple hours. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, we're definitely getting like very fast click through rate. We only deployed this actually like less than 6 weeks ago at this point, so it's like pretty fresh. But it's one of our favorite case studies because it's such a front facing kind of like interesting platform that we can show people. But yeah, I mean, they're growing quite quickly. I mean, I think they added like something like 40K in new revenue without even having marketed it in the like first like month or so that it's been running. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like over time, this might actually become kind of like their front running, like essentially like way into the company instead of ordering through emails and so forth. And it actually will probably cause an increase in their new customers essentially because they'll do this, get hooked, and then come back for all of their like repeat business, which is like the bigger owners. So yeah, I would expect in like maybe 3 or 4 months we'll do like a full case study on how big this was for them. But they're actually so excited to substantially increase the contract with us now actually in the past 6 weeks because they're like, oh, we want to have like this feature and like this other offering and so forth because people are really engaging with this. So at least they're feeling the momentum.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier that manufacturers are unique, which is one of the reasons why SaaS software or off-the-shelf software doesn't always resonate. But presumably, there's a kind of build-buy decision often when it comes to that decision. Is there a framework that you think people should use when it comes to deciding what to build and what to buy?
Yeah, no, that is definitely a tricky one, actually. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to tell that, off the shelf software won't work for you, or maybe it will work, like 60% as well as like, could if it was custom or whatever, without actually basically trying it out. Cause like demos kind of like look, straightforward and like they look like they do the thing, but especially in manufacturing, the devil's kind of in the details once you're like actually like running the thing. And we've seen this happen with like customers, like, somebody wanted to like mine a lot of data, for example, and they were using a SaaS software that was, like 10K a month or something like that. It was like dump your whole like repo in here of like documents and we'll extract the like work order, like, details or whatever, like, and do root cause analysis. And like, they churned it after like 2 months, right? But like within like days, we were able to deliver to them, like actual data of like what they wanted because we were building custom stuff around how their documents like looked and whatnot. And, we understood also kind of like what to look for in them in delivering the solution. So yeah, I mean, I would say it's like hard to tell. It's hard to have a framework. You can basically just either kind of like go try the off-the-shelf software in whatever the lightest touch possible way is to like, see quickly and scrap it without a long-term commitment if it's not working, or, talk to experts, I guess. I mean, like there are, people in, experts either in manufacturing or AI or both that can like look at your business problem, look at the tool and have tried it before and can probably give you an indication on like, this will work or probably won't.
Yeah, I would add one more thing here too, which is like, I think we've talked to some customers where even in the sales process and demo process, and as they start to sort of pull on the implementation thread, they find that the sort of approach that the software takes, the opinions that come baked into the software are sort of contrary to things that are about their business. So, the software starts to ask them to make changes to their workflows. And I think while sometimes that means that the software knows best, like they're aggregating information from hundreds of their customers to create a sort of single product. And sometimes that comes with best practices, but sometimes that also comes with the baggage of those hundreds of customers too, right? And so the reason the software might be telling you to make that approach is not because it's a best practice, but because it's just what another high paying customer really wanted the software to do. And so another, I think, reasonable rule of thumb, which won't apply in all situations and wouldn't have applied in this like a maintenance record example that Alex referred to, but is if you are talking to an off-the-shelf vendor and they're asking you to change your workflow to meet the software, then that's probably a sign that you should take a step back and say, like, is this a good change? Is this a change we want to make for our business? Or is this going to have some negative impact on our business? And maybe the ROI is still there in terms of like changing your workflow and getting all the benefits of using this tool, or maybe you can still have all those benefits if you took a more custom approach, and that is, economically viable in the last few years.
Yeah. You often build software on site with US based engineers who can walk the floor and have those conversations with the mechanical engineers that maybe they can't if they're remote. They're likely more expensive than someone who is not on site. Tell me a little bit about like why your model works better and how potential manufacturing clients should think about sort of the ROI of on-site higher cost labor.
Yeah, totally. Um, it's something Alex and I spend a lot of time talking about because, of course, it's very core to our business, right? Where we want to grow, who do we want to hire to solve the problems for our customers? And, of course, there's low hanging fruit and sort of obvious things like time zones and like language barriers, the sort of classic trade offs that you think about when you think about going overseas for talent. But really, I think there's been like a fundamental shift in software, and that is like we've been talking about, code is cheap now, and it's becoming cheaper, and it's only getting cheaper by the month. The hard thing is figuring out what to build, what problems to solve, and understanding what problems to solve could be the difference between a project taking 1 month and 4 months. It could be the difference between a project creating value and not creating value and just sitting on the shelf and just sort of like gathering metaphorical dust. So, yes, we do have to pay more per hour or per year for engineers in the US and pay for their travel and stuff to get them on site. But what we find is the ROI for our customers and for us of building the right thing, of the engineers soaking up that context when they are talking to the person themselves in person. And on the way out, they get to like see like, hey, there's that thing over there that we talked about, like that machine's not running, like can we go look and see like why that machine is down right now, since we were just talking about machine downtime. Or another example is we were talking to a customer 2 weeks ago and we were talking about machine downtime, and I got to basically just like look under the machine and see if it was plugged into anything on the network, right? And like if you go ask someone in a Zoom call or send someone an email, that becomes like a 45-minute task that gets delegated 3 times. But instead, 4 seconds, that now context is in my brain, and we understand, okay, there's something plugged into this machine via Ethernet, right? So data's has the potential to go somewhere, and that automatically changes like the types of conversations we can have with the execs as we're walking out the door. And that type of stuff is really hard to quantify, but we found in our experience that it results in building a better product, creating more value for people more easily, and it easily justifies the 4, 5, 6 times more salary of the sort of like lowest labor markets to a US software engineer salary.
Yeah. You've worked with a number of manufacturing and industrials clients. What's a lesson that you've learned over that time that's influenced and maybe changed how you scope and build AI powered tools for them?
Yeah, totally. This one I think is a challenging one because things are changing so quickly. And so, even as like I mentioned at the start, like I cut my teeth in the world of software engineering pre AI, right? And so, one of the things you're sort of taught as a software engineer is like, how can you build general solutions for problems? How can you build abstractions that scale? And as the cost of code plummets, some of these things, some of these intuitions you build have shifted. So, very concretely, we learned that we need to be less afraid of quote unquote hard coding things. So, take for example a pricing tool. Like, if you were building a pricing tool in 2019, you might have spent 3 months building out flexible pricing configurators that will allow an administrator or a sales team or whatever to adjust the algorithm that is going into the pricing thing. And you have to build that in a way that is sort of flexible to the future. So you not only are you building sort of software for manufacturers that each have different needs, but those needs change over time. And you're trying to build one tool that will grow with a manufacturer. But as the cost of software plummets, as the cost of writing an incremental line of code plummets, the sort of layer at which you need configurability kind of moves down to the code, right? Like, it's not that expensive to just have someone change the code for the algorithm that informs the pricing model that shows up in your CPQ tool. You don't necessarily need a perfectly flexible pricing configurator that allows you to pull in data from all these places. If you want to pull in data from a new place, you can just write the code to pull in the data from the new place. And so, even with some of our first customer engagements, we've been kind of having to get out of that motion of, oh, let's build them perfectly scalable solutions that are going to allow them to solve any problem in the future. And it's like, no, actually the ROI math doesn't pencil out on that. We should solve the problem now and be there for them, ready to solve the problem that comes in the future. And it's not going to be some crazy expensive investment in the future to re-architect the system. No, it's going to be a tweak. We'll tweak it and it'll be very cheap and it'll be fine. So that's been an interesting little lesson in sort of like changing how I think about creating value with code.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation, certainly illuminating for me. As we come to a close, maybe a couple last questions. The first is, there are a lot of different types of manufacturers, and 100 million to 5 billion is, captures a lot of different types of companies. Who's the best fit for you all? Who should reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, probably sweet spot's kind of like in the middle there, but in terms of like revenue and size. But yeah, I mean, I would say generally companies that are building any kind of like, custom machinery and stuff like that. That's like pretty chaotic and difficult to build software for without AI custom written kind of like workflows. And yeah, I mean, any companies that are having essentially like are noticing that they're having like big losses due to like manufacturing, whether that's defects, having tons of like, warranty coverage in the last couple of years for their customers that's like unexpected, or finding that there's probably downtime, or even need somebody to like assess whether there's downtime on, multi-$100 million plants that are producing things. Yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is like, that's kind of on the operational side, and then on the sort of like revenue growth side, I think there's a lot of things we've talked a little bit about today in the sort of context of quoting, but I think there's a lot of things you can do uh, today to streamline how you serve your customers and how you reach new customers and how you grow your business. And so, we've also been talking to people who are revenue constrained, not so much like operationally constrained. And so, people in that sort of scale range have problems that often we can help them solve to expand them to new customer bases or grow within their existing customer bases. And if those two things come to mind as sort of bottlenecks for your business, I think that's areas that we can probably help.
Amazing. Alex and Chandler, thanks for coming by. Just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks.